Hello there, people of the internet. I'm out here with a couple of old guns, like really old guns, like before smokeless powder was really a thing level of old guns. And it has me thinking, because of the particular cartridges that I'm using, I'm over here thinking about how like really old rifle cartridges, like black powder rifle cartridges, were very large, heavy, slow-moving bullets, especially in comparison to what we use nowadays. Nowadays, like our modern rifle cartridges, let's go ahead and lean towards like an intermediate rifle cartridge. They actually get their effectiveness from velocity, like say the 223 Remington or the 5.56 NATO. That tends to be a 62 grain or a 55 grain, traveling anywhere from 30,000 to 3,200 feet per second. And that's not a very heavy bullet, but man, is it traveling very fast, and that is where it gets its effectiveness from. Well, that's something that smokeless powder allows us to do, and that's not something that black powder allows us to do. Like, for example, I got this trapdoor Springfield in 4570. You guys have seen this a couple of times on the channel now. 4570 is a large, heavy, slow-moving round. I have an example of it right here. This right here is a 300 grain bullet with 60 grains of black powder behind it. The original loading for these rifles was a 405 grain bullet with 70 grains of black powder behind it, so a larger charge and a heavier bullet. But this right here is still an overwhelmingly powerful cartridge that I have seen whenever I've been out here using it today. So 4570, that 300 grain bullet, or even that 405 grain bullet, should be traveling at around 1,400 to 1,500 feet per second in comparison to something like a 5.56, which is literally twice that velocity. Now, the reason why that is just because black powder is not all that great at propelling things, or not propelling, propelling things, that is the word I'm looking for, versus something like smokeless powder, which actually serves as a good, reliable propellant, versus black powder, which more or less just kind of explodes, and the explosion throws whatever is in front of it down the tube of the barrel and out the gun and over towards whatever target it is that you're firing at. It's just not that effective at getting a whole lot of velocity. There are some black powder cartridges out there that like get up to 18, maybe 1,900 feet per second, but nothing close to the 3,000 plus feet per second that we see from smokeless powder on a regular basis. There's some smokeless powder rounds out there that'll like push 4,500, 5,000 feet per second, some insane speeds, but you just can't do that with black powder. So since we don't have the velocity to be able to get the energy transfer onto target, they had to rely on mass. So you have this heavy bullet traveling quite slowly, and that makes for not a very accurate firearm out at long distances. The one really good thing about smokeless powder is somebody can shoot, like, say, something like a 6.5 Creedmoor at 600 yards without much effort. Hell, they could probably push that out to like 800 yards without much effort, versus something like a black powder 4570. That bullet is moving slow, and you are going to have one hell of an arc on that rifle. Like, just shooting out to, like, say 400 yards, you have to kind of mortar your round in onto your target from 400 yards away. Like, you have to aim your rifle essentially into the sky and shoot, and the round has to go up, and then gravity will have to affect it and pull it back down. Gravity pulls at a constant, so we know how gravity is going to affect the bullet in terms of drop. But the issue is, the longer a bullet is in the air, and in this case, since it's moving slowly, it's going to be in the air a lot longer than something that's moving much quicker. That arc has to be significantly more because gravity is going to affect it more, so you got to aim higher. So it's a fat, slow-moving round. I'm not sure what the zero on this goes out to. It looks like the zero on this goes out to 1,200, but I don't know how much I believe that in terms of accuracy and whatnot. But we have our 4570 round, and most of your engagements, even to this day, like with modern military firearms, most of your engagements are going to be within 300 yards or so, and like most of those are going to be within 100 yards or so. So 45-70 is definitely adequate out to those distances, but it definitely takes much more skill versus something like a 223, where 300 yards, like you just kind of aim at a man-sized silhouette, and odds are you're going to hit it at 300 yards. Like you might aim at the upper region at those distances, but the trajectory is flat enough to where you don't really have to compensate for much, versus something like this right here. Before I go loading it, let me lift this up and bring us up to, let's see, this right here is what we are looking at for, this is saying 400. There's no spring to retain this, so I just got to kind of hold it up. So if I was aiming out at 400 yards, I would be aiming like way over the horizon in the tree lining and everything like that. It's definitely quite the quite the arc of trajectory just at something like that, versus something like the 5.56, where you could just kind of poke a hole at whatever it is that you're physically aiming at. I think the drop on something like 5.56, if you have a 100-yard zero, actually if you zero it at 25, I think that it's also on point at that 300 yards. I could be wrong about that, but anyway, the point is you don't have to compensate a whole lot for something like that the same way that you would for something like this 45-70. They just did not have the means to, they did not have the gunpowder to be able to get fast moving bullets. That's why whenever smokeless gunpowder came out and they were able to get really fast moving bullets, it was so revolutionary, and they thought combat was going to be taking place at way farther distances than the past with black powder. So that's one of the reasons why a lot of your early smokeless powder rifles, like the minimum zero is like 400 yards, versus something like this right here, where 100 yards is like, I don't want to say the, ooh, that is disgusting smelling. I don't want to say 100 yards is a max effective range, but 100 yards for like the average person, the average conscript, the average non-skilled shooter, that's about where you would start to really draw the line with an old school rifle like this. A lot of people would be able to push these out to like 300 yards, but beyond that, it takes some pretty expert marksmanship to be able to hit something with a slow moving black powder round. Now, there were some rifles that were beginning to develop smokeless powder rounds. This right here is a Steyr 8890. You guys have also seen this on the channel a couple of times. The Steyr 8890 is one of those rifles where it is black powder technology starting to turn smokeless powder. It was chambered in 8x50. I think the original 8x50 loadings were a semi-smokeless round, but the rifle itself was definitely a black powder era gun, and it's just not strong enough to handle like a full smokeless powder loading. So that's one of the reasons why whenever I load for this rifle, I load with black powder. This is a 155 grain bullet. There was a shell in that. This is a 155 grain bullet out of this rifle, and it should be, honestly, I got no idea how fast it's gonna go. My bet 1,500 or so feet per second, but it's a smaller bullet, so it might actually be traveling faster in comparison to something like the 45-70, which is a significantly larger bullet. Now, I'm sure that the 45-70 has significantly more power than something like this 45 grain bullet, or not 45 grain, 155 grain bullet. But that being said, I mean, I'm not sure how good of a trajectory this would have in comparison to 45-70. It is a pointed bullet, mind you, but at the same time, it just does not have the velocity necessary to obtain those speeds, just because it is, in this particular case, a black powder loaded round. So although it does have that modern bullet style, it probably would be a little bit more effective out at longer distances, but it's not going to have the velocity necessary to really put it on par with like a modern day cartridge. So let me send this one downrange. Oh, failure to fire, and that's okay. This right here is, that was one hell of a flinch too. This right here is a C-grade RTI rifle from Ethiopia. Still working out the kinks. The firing spring inside of it seems to be a little bit on the weak side, but we should still be able to set it off, especially for this next round. There we go. That set it off. Really smell the sulfur in that gunpowder. But smaller bullet, lighter weight, probably driving a little bit faster when pointed, probably a little bit more aerodynamic going down range. But this was during that time era where we were starting to lean more into smokeless powder. I'm just loading this with black powder because it's a 140-year-old gun and I don't want to push it. So I wanted to talk about that. I don't really have anything else to add on to the subject. It's just a cool concept. I really like old, slow-moving black powder bullets. It's just the time era that I'm really fascinated with. That's kind of how I am. Anyway, folks, thanks for watching. I appreciate your time. Like, subscribe, share. Description below has a link to all sorts of stuff. Go check it out. You guys go off, have yourself a fantastic day. I will see you guys on the next episode. Since I've done this. Bonnie and Clyde be damned. Poor man's Garen. Shame that bolt action shotguns aren't more mainstream.